Okay, so here we're asked to write a while loop that will print 5 hearts, and I've prepared the text window by changing the font color to red. And I just want to reiterate, we're going to use a while loop that's counter-controlled repetition. I want to reiterate the essentials that we talked about in the last video. First and foremost, you need a counter variable, and you're going to initialize that to either 0 or 1. You can really start counting anywhere, but typically you'll start counting at 0 or 1. So let's go ahead and create essential number 1 here. I'm going to create a variable, we'll call it counter. Again, it could be called count, counter, X, Y, Z, you know, whatever you want to use. I typically use an explicit variable name when we're just learning the basics, so it's just easier to understand. But you will commonly see little throwaway variable names for counter variables. The letter I, you know, A, B, C, X, Y, Z, and whatnot. So let's start at 1 in this case, and so that's essential number 1, and then essential number 2 is part of the syntax of the while loop. That would be the relational expression. So let me dive in, and here's my keyword while, and in this case we're going to say while counter is less than or equal to 5. Alright, that's essential number 2 here, our relational expression, which will evaluate to true or false and really determine whether or not the loop keeps going or whether or not it's time to quit. And then I like to come down to the end here and end that sandwich before I fill in the middle. It's really easy to forget that, and it's not going to work if you don't have that bottom part of the sandwich. And then, okay, so that's essential number 2, and essential number 3 is going to be inside of the body of the loop. So let's add our increment expression, counter equals counter plus 1. Okay, meaning counter's new value is going to be whatever was in there, but add 1 to it, and that increments the value of counter. A very, very common thing to want to do in programming. Okay, so anyway, I guess the nuts and bolts of the loop is to actually print a heart in this case. So we'll go ahead and use our text object, the get character, and the character code for the heart is a 3. Okay? Alright, so we don't need to save that. I'll go ahead and run this. Alright, let's see what we have. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hearts, as expected. Okay? So let's make a small change to this and see what the effect is. Notice I started counter at 1. You could start counting at 0. You can start counting anywhere. I'm going to start counting at 0. What do you think this will do to the end result? Instead of starting the count at 1, I start the count at 0, and we're going up to 5. So if I were to count on my fingers, but starting at 0, the first finger I hold up is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 6 fingers in the air, okay? So when I run this, I actually have 6 hearts instead of 5. So this is something that you need to be aware of. Where you start counting makes a difference. If you start counting at 0, you're always going to get 1 more than if you had started your count at 1. Another thing that makes a difference is your relational operator. Okay, so here we have less than or equal to. So counter is going to keep going while it's less than or equal to 5. What if I change it to simply less than? Okay, so counter keeps going, and really when it reaches 4, that's the last time that the loop is going to run. So we start counting at 0, and 4 is the last time we're going to get a heart out of this loop, because we're going while counter is less than 5, and 4 is the maximum value that is less than 5. So that's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 5 fingers if we're counting on our fingers. And so now we're back down to 5 hearts. So this also matters. Do you have just a less than, or do you have a less than or equal to? If you have a less than, then you're always going to have one less than if you have a less than or equal to, one less repetition. Okay? Then another thing that you always have to keep an eye out for is this guy, the increment expression. If he's not there, how many times is this loop going to go? We saw this in the smiley face video that was just before this one. If you don't have that increment expression, this loop is going to go on forever. Okay? So that also affects things. So I always want you to be aware of those three things. Where do you start? Where and how do you end? And also, is there an increment? Typically, on your second exam, you'll see several questions that present like a snippet of code with a loop, and it'll say, how many times will this loop run? And then you'll have a multiple choice of, several answers, and you need to look at the important parts here and make a determination how many times that loop will run. So, and the next video will deal with that as well.